What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, September 26, 2018, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Powwow on a Friday. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. It's a very, very busy news day. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone and put you on the air with your comments, questions, opinions, and so forth. So getting right on into it, let's start with the latest chapter in Kaonohi, because I don't know about you, this has gone on just way, way too long here. And it looks like the leadership is finally saying enough is really enough. And they're saying basically there will be a vote on Brett Kavanaugh directly after Christine Ford testifies tomorrow, if she even shows up. And right now that's up in the air. She's making additional ridiculous demands. She wants a smaller room. She wants the media limited. She wants a limousine. She wants a red carpet. She wants Perrier. I mean, just all kinds of ridiculous stuff here. And the Senate Judiciary Committee has basically set the Kavanaugh vote for no later than Friday. And Mitch McConnell is backing it up, saying that he might keep the Senate through the weekend, just not let them go home until the vote actually happens. And I'm going to make a prediction here that you're going to see the Democrats just stand up and walk on out so that they can start saying, well, it wasn't a legitimate vote because we weren't there. But it has gone on way too long, and it's really, really jumped the shark here. And people are finally starting to speak out about how ridiculous this is. Mitch McConnell, at the same time he was laying down the law about the vote, was saying, this is America. Evidence matters. Facts matters. We have never been and do not wish to be a society in which a single uncorroborated allegation can wield veto power over somebody's life. Everybody deserves better than this. He's absolutely right. Unfortunately, he's wrong about we've never been a society where an uncorroborated allegation can wreck somebody's life. We went through that with the Salem witch trials. We went through that with the McCarthy era. We went through that in the 1990s, where women were basically presumed to never lie. If they're saying they're being assaulted or raped, it has to be true. And a lot of innocent men went to prison over that one. Lindsey Graham is out there saying this is just, it's time to apply the rule of law. What do the Democrats want? For the FBI to interview everyone in Maryland from the summer of 1982? And he's pointing out something that we pointed out earlier in this whole circus. If this were a criminal allegation, you would never even get started. The accuser can't tell the accused where it happened, when it happened. They're admitting that they were drunk. The memory was faulty. There's no corroboration outside the accusation itself. You couldn't sue in civil court for the same reason. You couldn't even get a warrant. So he's saying, yeah, they're going to listen to Christine Ford, but, there has to be a standard. You can't be presumed guilty on the basis of just an accusation, because if the accusation is enough, God help us all. And there's not a lot I agree with Lindsey Graham about, but he's absolutely nailed this one. You can't be a society where an accusation carries that much power. There is supposed to be a presumption of innocence and the requirement of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And what's going on here is the Democrats are weaponizing sex abuse allegations for political gain. That's all it is. That's all it is. They have to say, oh, it's terrible. They did these terrible. They're accused of these terrible things, and we should stop them here. And again, it's like right out of the Salem witch trials, which I think stands as a cautionary tale about false accusations, and the collapse of due process. So, again, as I mentioned before, Christine Ford is out there with all kinds of demands regarding what is going on with the hearing. She wants a smaller room. She wants to dictate the press access to the hearing. Apparently, she's very concerned about too much media access because, obviously, for those of us out on the internet, those of us in the independent media, it gives us more material to basically look at what she says with a critical eye here. And again, you know, she was trying to demand that Kavanaugh testify first, which means he would not have a chance to answer whatever she says when she testifies. And that is exactly the reverse of due process. Normally, the accuser testifies first and is then cross-examined, and then the defendant gets to respond. That's how it's supposed to work. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. But it really has reached a ridiculous level. Truth, due process, evidence, the rights of the accused, the presumption of innocence, it's all just been thrown away by the Democrats in pursuit of the progressive agenda. We're really living in 1984 right now. Google is massaging internet searches to promote correct thinking. A member of the so-called deep state in an anonymous op-ed brags that its resistance is undermining an elected president. All of the major intelligence agencies were weaponized in 2016 to ensure the proper president would be elected, meaning Hillary. It's gotten surreal. It's gotten absolutely surreal. And you really ought to go back and read 1984 or hunt down the movie, because we're living it right now. The nation that the Founding Fathers created, the nation that I was a child in, no longer exists. We are in a dystopian society. All right, we're going to take a phone call here from Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, a couple of things, and I'm being really serious. This woman, the professor, does she even exist?
You mean Christine Ford? Yeah, she's real. I'm not so sure about I'm not so sure about the most recent one, and I'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, because this lady, like you mentioned, she's asking for demands, she's asking for this and for that. How do you know that she's even going to show up tomorrow?
At this point, nobody's really sure. I mean, she keeps waffling back and forth on it, and you know, it's very much up in the air. But at this point, I think the Democrats have kind of shot their wad on this one. I would agree. You know, I think especially with this most recent allegation, this one was so over the shark. I think they've wrecked their own credibility.
I would agree. You know, the one thing, I was reading my papers today, the one thing I really find shocking, did you see where Ford Motors, they have lost over $1 billion due to the tariffs?
Yes.
And I said to myself, if Ford is hurting, what about the other companies? And Donald Trump is still out there threatening China.
Yeah.
So, well, you know, I really think the problem is really going to hurt America come Christmas time and also coming the upcoming year. Because right now, when things really get higher and higher, you're going to find more and more people not being able to buy things. And plus, like you mentioned the other day, gas prices are going up.
Oh, absolutely. They're going up because of the sanctions against Iran. They're talking about $100 oil, possibly even as high as $150 a barrel.
Wow. Well, Michael, that's all I wanted to say. You take care.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to James in Charlotte. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Hello, Mike. Let me just mention just a couple of things quickly about that I've noticed that's come up in the people that are coming for the accusers of Judge Kavanaugh. the one thing that's common to them is that they're all asking for an FBI investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And if assuming that that the FBI went ahead and did investigate this, the first thing that would have to be done would be to take the testimony of the accusers. So why not allow Christine Ford to go ahead and present her testimony? And if there is anything that warrants an investigation, then the FBI can go ahead and do it.
Well, the FBI has already said they're not going to investigate her allegations because she doesn't know where it happened, when it happened. There's absolutely nothing for them to go on. And it's like, what are they going to do?
Right.
Interview everybody that lives in the state, back at that time? Plus the fact the crime did not cross state borders, so the FBI does not actually have jurisdiction. If this had actually happened, this woman should have gone to the police. And it's rather curious that she did not. In fact, it's curious that she never even mentioned this assault until a 2012 therapy session. But again, at the therapy session, she didn't mention Kavanaugh's name.
Right. That's why it's just a transparent delaying tactic.
That's exactly what it is.
Really.
That's exactly what it is.
If they manage to dispose of these witnesses, hopefully that they can rather promptly, I can guarantee you there's going to be another witness will come forward.
Oh, yeah.
And they'll be demanding an FBI investigation.
Well, again, the FBI is already saying they're not going to investigate. There's nothing to go on. It's an allegation with no corroborating, supporting information. And again, it's not their jurisdiction. Yeah.
One more thing quickly. I've heard on the on some of these programs, like on CNN and MSNBC, is saying, well, how can how can three different witnesses be lying about Kavanaugh? But the point is that they're all making allegations about different alleged instances. I mean, Christine Ford was talking about something that supposedly happened to her in high school. The other woman, I forget her name, was it Ramirez?
Yes.
That is talking about something that happened in college, and this third accuser is talking about some indefinite thing that may have happened to her in high school. So they're all talking about different instances. They're not corroborating each other at all.
No, they do not corroborate each other at all. And don't forget, back when the 2016 campaign was underway, it came on out that there was literally a cash reward being offered for any women who would come forward and claim that Donald Trump sexually assaulted them. And there are women who will accept that money to come on out and make those kind of allegations. And looking back at the 1990s male bash militant feminism, the leaders of the feminist movement were literally encouraging women to falsely accuse men of rape. They even said, oh, it's a form of empowerment. It'll get you ahead in the workplace. If there's a guy who's standing in your way for a promotion, you just accuse him of sexual harassment and get him out of the way. There was even the assistant dean of student activity at Vassar, I think her name was Catherine Comans, who actually said that, a false accusation of rape is a good experience for a man to have to go through. I mean, that's how completely wacko it got. And we're right back there again. All these years later, and we're back in that same mindset that it's okay for women to cry rape at men, for any reason they feel like doing it.
Yeah. Well, we can only hope that these witnesses can be fairly rapidly, fairly promptly disposed of and shown for what I believe they truly are.
Well, I think pretty much everybody's already figured out what they truly are. It's a political ploy. It's a delaying tactic. The call for FBI investigations. The Democrats were actually hoping that they could delay the Kavanaugh nomination until the first of the year, with the hope that they were going to control the Senate and they could block the nomination. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen. They basically flubbed this one, and they made themselves look really bad. And I think it's a good thing that the leadership is going to force the vote through by Friday or over the weekend, because that's going to make the GOP look like they're strong and trying to get things done. And we're going to go into the November midterms with the Democrats looking just as sleazy as all get out.
Yeah, well, they definitely look sleazy.
They do.
Who knows what else is going to come out? But, well, I appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open. Now, as far as these three accusers, there's already one we no longer have to worry about because this Deborah Ramirez has already come on out and said through her lawyer she refuses to testify under oath to the Senate and refuses to provide a statement under oath. There will be no sworn legal statement. So she's out of play. She's already out of play. And remember, Ramirez was saying that she wasn't really sure if it was Kavanaugh that was waving his male private parts in her face. So it wasn't like there was anything there. This brings us to the third accuser, who is represented by porn lawyer Michael Avenatti. Now, he came out earlier this week on his Twitter feed with this outlandish tale that Brett Kavanaugh and his buddies were literally running a torture dungeon in Washington, D.C., that they had used drugs and alcohol on women to set them up for massive gang rapes, what was called a train, where there's literally a line of men who are all going to take their turn with these women who've been drugged. And then it came on out yesterday that Avenatti may have been pranked by a 4chan user who simply called up, his girlfriend called him up and fed him this lurid tale, and Avenatti, thinking he's got the story of the year, ran with it. Then he pulled on back and said, no, she's afraid of her life, she's not going to testify, and he locked his Twitter feed. Now today he's saying that absolutely he was not pranked, and that he's got this accuser, and that she's getting ready to come forward with all of this amazing testimony. Now, they've dropped the idea of a torture dungeon, but supposedly there's a woman named Julie Swetnick, and so far I've only seen one picture of her. She herself has not spoken with the Senate Judiciary Committee or anybody in the media. Everything is coming through Michael Avenatti. But this allegation is that Kavanaugh and his buddies drugged women at parties in the 1980s who were then gang raped. Now, Kavanaugh came on out and said, this is ridiculous, and from the Twilight Zone, I don't know who this is, and this never happened. I agree. This is Twilight Zone stuff. This is jumping the shark. Remember, the FBI investigated Kavanaugh 6 separate times as part of the vetting process to be in the Supreme Court. They never found any of this stuff. So anyway, this woman is named Julie Swetnick, and she is claiming through this signed declaration provided by Avenatti that Kavanaugh and Mark Judge during high school, this supposedly happened in high school in 81 and 82, would spike the punch at house parties so women who drank it could be gang raped by a train of boys. And again, the accusations are getting more and more lurid, and I think the thinking is that, first of all, Avenatti might have been pranked and he doesn't want to back down, or the thinking may be that the more incredible and the more sensational the allegations are, the more people will believe them. You know, the principle of the big lie. The more outrageous a lie is, the more people will tend to believe it. And it really is ridiculous at this point. Anyway, we'll be right back with more about Kavanaugh after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're talking about this smear job trying to derail Brett Kavanaugh's nomination, and the latest and greatest accusation is coming from this woman, Julie Swetnick, who is claiming that she witnessed in 1981 and 1982 Brett Kavanaugh and Mark Judge drugging women at these parties at the high school in order to set them up to be gang raped, and claims that she was one of them. There is a small, little, tiny problem that we need to deal with here. Julie Swetnick graduated from high school in 1980. So it's not likely she would have been hanging around the high school crowd. She would have been, already getting into college, in theory, getting into the college parties. So already that story is starting to really fall apart. So, again, it's a smear job. And Avenatti has come up with this gang rape accusation. It's a last-ditch, desperate ploy to halt the Senate confirmation. And as I mentioned before, Mitch McConnell is saying, no, the vote's going to happen. The vote is going to happen. Oh, by the way, Avenatti is getting a really swelled head about all this. First of all, he got to represent the porn star Stormy Daniels, and he got to sue the president for defamation, which looks like that's going to get dismissed here. He's actually saying he's going to run for president in 2020. So, anyway, Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley sent ranking member of the committee Dianne Feinstein a scathing letter yesterday, shooting down Feinstein's demands to postpone tomorrow's hearing with Christine Ford, and also included this reminder that false statements made in the press are not subject to criminal penalty, but false statements to Congress are. So there's a warning that the leadership, if it turns out these accusers are caught in a lie, they will move forward with some kind of prosecution here. Now, Christine Ford is now claiming she has 4 people to confirm her claims. And the liberals are out there saying, see, we got him now. We've got him now. We're going to finish him up. Well, not really, because what Christine Ford has, first of all, everybody who was around when she claims it happened has said, no, it did not happen. The 4 people that Christine Ford is waving around now are people that she told the story to after the 2012 therapy sessions. So it's hearsay evidence. They were not there. They didn't see anything. They don't have any firsthand information. But it's basically a case of, well, back in 2012, I told my therapist that Kavanaugh attacked me. The therapist said no, Kavanaugh's name wasn't mentioned. And so Ford has dredged up these other 4 friends who are saying, oh, yes, back then she claimed that she had been assaulted. That's not court-worthy evidence here. By the way, somebody found this old clip of Joe Biden during the 1991 Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings, which show him dismissing the usefulness of having the FBI investigate the allegations against the Supreme Court nominee. And for those of us who are old enough to remember that circus, it was the same thing all over again. The use of an unfounded sexual allegation to try and derail a Supreme Court nominee. Now, I want to put a little logic out here for you. Okay. The liberals are out there saying all women must be believed. They can never be doubted. Okay? They're the same people who insist there's no such thing as a biological man or woman to begin with. So all Kavanaugh has to do is say, I self-identify as a woman and I didn't do any of those things, and the liberals are going to have to accept that at face value. I think. Of course, liberals aren't really all that logical about any of these things here. It is absurd. The harassment of Ted Cruz is continuing. Apparently, the Washington, D.C. chapter of Antifa sent a message to Ted Cruz following the chasing him out of a restaurant, saying the Texas senator is not safe. That sounds like a threat. It sounds like it should be actionable. But interestingly enough, Dom Lemon, went on CNN and saying, it's just part of the job. It's not a big deal. It's what Cruz signed up for. It's just part of being a public figure. No, it isn't. It is harassment and terrorism and brown shirt tactics. It absolutely is. And it is unacceptable behavior. It's completely unacceptable. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go to the telephones now to Bob in Michigan. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael. I got a solution for this problem. Why don't they make these accusers, Ford and the rest of them, take polygraph tests?
Well, the polygraph is not really reliable. In fact, that's why it's not allowed as evidence in a court of law. What I'm wondering is why they're not coming out with the voice stress analyzer. And that's a technology which is sort of faded from public awareness. But I got to actually work with one of the earlier units, and this was a long time ago, back when I was at CBS Television City. They are very good at determining stress. And my opinion was their real value was less about lie detecting than in a therapy environment of finding out just, what people's buttons were. And to get through that. But I'm talking about the old original strip chart. But it's a technology that I guess the government doesn't want the American people to know about it, which is weird. For a while, you could buy them at places like the Sharper Image. In fact, I have one of those units here. It's not as good as the strip chart recorder version, but it's fairly accurate.
Well, anyhow, if they at least, they could tell them, the accusers, that they need to submit to either one or both, and see what their reaction is. If they refuse, then hey, game over.
Well, again, what we're going to get. Again, the issue is the Democrats are simply going to say polygraphs are not reliable, and the reality is that no, they're not. They're overhyped in movies and TV shows, but that's about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, anyhow, it'd be interesting if you, like I say, they told them they had to submit and see what their reaction is.
You're right. It would be interesting to see the reaction. But again, the second accuser's already pulled herself out of it. She won't testify. She won't submit a sworn statement. So, she's off the game board at this point. We still don't know if Sorry?
I bet Kavanaugh would say, hey, I'll take a polygraph.
I assume that he probably would. But
if he has already,
the reality of these systems, they're not good. They're not really accurate and reliable. Very often, the outcome of the polygraph depends on the skill of the operator or the interpretation of the operator. Yeah. It's kind of a black science.
Yeah, right.
And I'm saying this because many years ago, when I was just starting out in college, was before my magic career took off, and I was working at a 7-Eleven store to pay my way through college, and somebody was stealing money out of the register, and they gave us all polygraphs, and there was a false positive on mine. And so, obviously, I have a prejudice against these devices. Basically what it was, I was so shocked and upset that anybody would even think I was stealing from the store, that it provoked a reaction. And the operator said, means he's lying.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I can understand that. Well, anyhow, the Democrats say they want the FBI involved, so I imagine they'd have some pretty good operators, so. Well, anyhow, just an idea, maybe save the country. Quite a mess here. I don't know how much money it's costing,
Well, it's a big, huge mess, but it looks like it's going to be over this weekend, and I cannot tell you how happy I am about that. So, Bob, thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Now, there are 8 Republicans who still have not committed to voting to confirm Kavanaugh, and I'm going to give you the list, And those of you who are living in these states might want to make a point of calling your senator and saying, we support Kavanaugh, if for no other reason then we need to send a message to the Democrats that these kind of sleazy tactics will not be rewarded. So the senators, the GOP senators who still have not committed to vote for Kavanaugh are Susan Collins of Maine, Bob Corker of Tennessee, Mike Enzi of Wyoming, Jeff Flake of Arizona, James Lankford of Oklahoma, Jerry Moran of Kansas, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and I don't think she's going to vote for confirmation because the native Alaskans do not like Kavanaugh. And then finally, the last one is Ben Sasse from Nebraska. So if you live in those states, call those senators and say, yeah, we have to send a message. These kind of slimy political tactics, we cannot allow it to be rewarded. Okay. Now then, getting on to other politics here. Apparently, Hillary Clinton is on her way to New Jersey to campaign for Menendez. And apparently, he's in a very, very tight challenge, which I can sort of understand because, he was tried over federal corruption charges and then severely admonished by the Senate Ethics Committee. So I imagine that the people of New Jersey are not enthusiastic about returning him to office. But Hillary Clinton's up there, like attracts like, and she's up there trying to use what little remains of her star power to campaign for him and get some money into his campaign war chest. I don't know how well that's going to work. I remember back in 2016 when Trump was literally filling these sports arenas. And Hillary was like at these places like these bicycle shops, and hardly anybody was showing up. They'd put her own crew in the picture to make it look like there were more people. Now, interestingly enough, George Soros' spokesman, Michael Vachon, has admitted to the Washington Post columnist David Ignatius that Soros indirectly funded Fusion GPS, the so-called opposition research firm behind the infamous Christopher Steele dossier. And that organization, which was formed last year by Daniel Jones, a former Senate Intelligence Committee staffer for Senator Dianne Feinstein, paid Fusion GPS as a contractor to continue an investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. They set this thing up to go on out and get the goods, as it were. And all they came up with was, of course, that dossier, which has been totally discredited. Okay, let's take another phone call. Mike in Kentucky, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. I just, I finally took some time to look through into this Kavanaugh stuff. It just seems like another in a long line of soap operas, and like you, I can't believe it's dragged on this long. And it's making the whatever it was, the hair on the pop can thing with I forgot his name now. Thomas, was it? Clarence Thomas, that
Yes.
They dragged that out and made a big deal out of.
Oh yeah, that was, there was
Paraded her
pubic
all over
hair
the
on the
place.
soft drink can and all kinds of nonsense.
Oh
here.
yeah, this is just making that seem like child's play. But after reading about some of this stuff, I can't believe that it's being even entertained, because the witness credibility is just trashed. I mean, the only time she mentioned it was to a therapist, and it was 4 men, not 2 in the room, and Kavanaugh, and she didn't remember it. She didn't mention Kavanaugh. She was talking to the therapist in 2011, I think. But and you can't bring this up. 2012. You can't bring this up. Men are supposed to just shut up about it. They're not supposed to talk about this. You're not a victim. You sound like a predator if you're trying to criticize these women at all. And I got berated over that. But one thing, I haven't got a chance to listen to you as often in the last few weeks. What's the deal with, I remember reading about Kavanaugh, underneath of what was his name, Ken Rice, or the guy that was over the Vince Foster thing.
Ken Starr.
He was Ken Starr. He was in the background there and trashed for being, buying into all the right wing conspiracy theories about the Clintons. But I ran across some articles that talk about him being basically complicit in covering it up. That he was actually more of a deep state operative and helped to divert and distract away from all the signs that the body was planted and had been moved there and stuff like that. I read a couple of articles about that I haven't heard. It's almost like all this sexual stuff is a big distraction from how far down in the deep state this guy is.
Well, sex is always used as a distraction from other things. I mean, Ken Starr himself did that with Monica Lewinsky in order to not allow the Whitewater hearings to get into the issue of government-sanctioned gun and drug running down to Nicaragua. So they dangled the blue dress, and Monica Lewinsky and the American people got suckered, and they went over and they said, oh, it's a sex scandal, it's a sex scandal. And the real scandal, that our government is the biggest drug runner in the country, remained safe.
Well, then it did. I guess, with the internet now, I think a lot of people are kind of hip to a lot of this stuff. It's just that getting them to talk about it in public is kind of troublesome, because they don't want to be seen as socially as a conspiracy theorist. That still works on a lot of people. So, even though there's so much about the tinfoil hat conspiracy theory stuff that's actually come out and it's true, especially when it comes to, I feel so vindicated after the likes of William Binney and Snowden came out. But, and some of this other stuff like the harassment on the Cuban embassy workers with some kind of directed energy weapons, that caused hearing damage and things like that. And
I'm not sure how real that part of it was here. I don't agree with Kavanaugh on a lot of things, and his role within that Foster cover-up is one of them. His rather lax interpretation of the Fourth Amendment is another. But at this point, I think we need to send these politicians a message that these kind of tactics are not going to work anymore, and they're not going to be rewarded. And so if you are living in any of these states whose senators have not yet committed to vote for Kavanaugh, please make a point of getting on the phone and telling your senator, you've got to vote to confirm Kavanaugh, because this kind of dirty politics has to stop.
Have you seen the hashtag #HimToo stuff? Because that's what a lot of people are coming forward and saying, look, no man is safe from these type of accusations, no evidence, nobody is safe. Your dad's not safe, your husband's not safe.
Absolutely.
Your grandson isn't safe. Any of your male friends aren't safe. There's, hashtag Stand with Brent and all that, but I still, I guess you've looked at the role that Kavanaugh had with the Vince Foster distraction.
Yeah, I missed it. He was kind of a minor player, though. But Washington D.C., you get along by going along, and I'm not happy about that.
No,
but
he's been in the swamp a long time. So big surprise, I guess.
Oh yeah.
All right, man. Talk to you later.
All right, we're going to let you go here. Thank you very much. And apparently the Senate Judiciary Committee has already picked up on the fact that this latest accuser graduated the high school before the alleged gang rapes happened. And apparently Kavanaugh's lawyer, Beth Wilkinson, came on out and said, well, if you yourself were personally not raped, why didn't you report this to the police at the time? And that's a real big hole in the story. So I think that Avenatti has jumped the shark with this, and I think it's basically going to discredit this whole campaign. And we really cannot allow this kind of dirty politics to continue, because this is way, way over the top. It's much worse than that whole Anita Hill fiasco. Okay, let's take another phone call. Wayne in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha.
Aloha.
Mike, I got a real problem with the fact that George Soros still walking the planet. Now, I would think that after all that's been discovered about this man, ripping off the Jewish folks during the World War II deal, that the Jews would have a real problem with this individual. And I already know that the United States has a real problem with this individual. Would you please tell me how he's still free to walk the planet?
Because he's giving his money to all the right people.
What does money have to do with it when you're talking about blood and guts?
Money has everything to do with it. Money is what drives our government, our commerce, certainly. And the ruling class, I mean, that's all they really care about, is turning the blood and guts into money.
Well, it sounds like that they have a drug addiction to money.
They do. That's why we call them money junkies.
Ah, that's what you call them?
Yep.
How do we get around that? What do you do? Just pull the plug on the money? Get rid of the
you've
Federal
got to have
Reserve?
some kind of money, but what you need, the proper place for government is to sit in the middle between the ultra wealthy and the ordinary general population and act as an arbitrator between the two of them. That's how our country was actually set up originally. Unfortunately, our government has gone totally over to the side of the money junkies. They passed that ridiculous Citizens United, which basically turned the Capitol building into a one-stop shopping center for all the corrupting influences in our country. And basically, we're no longer a capitalist country. We've descended into economic fascism. And it's kind of ironic to see this so-called anti-fascist group running around the streets of Washington, D.C., apparently quite comfortable with the fact that our government has gone totally fascist. The government authority is aligned with corporate interests against the general population. That's the classic definition of fascism, and that's not me. That's from Benito Mussolini, who basically set up Italy as a fascist dictatorship leading into World War II. And he was much admired by a lot of people among the wealthy of the United States of America. Anyway, Wayne, we got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, somebody just sent me an update. It turns out that Christine Ford did apparently take a polygraph, which was set up by her legal team. Now, remember what I said to that phone call. Polygraphs are notoriously unreliable, and the person operating it can skew the results any way they want to go. And once again, the details of the story changed. And here's where it gets interesting. The polygraph was administered in Maryland. She lives in California. She flew to take this polygraph, which undermines her claim that the reason she couldn't testify on Monday was she's afraid of flying and, she had to drive. And by the way, she used to work here in Hawaii. I don't think she drove out here. Maybe drive a quarter mile, come up for air, drive a quarter mile, come up for air. I don't know. Now, Michael Avenatti is now saying he will not make this latest accuser, Julie Swetnick, available for any media contact. And on the basis of that, the New York Times is saying it's unable to corroborate her story, which is certainly true. More and more people from the high school where Kavanaugh went have come forward saying that they never saw Brett behaving anything at all like this, nor do they recall ever meeting someone named Julie Swetnick. Now, again, it came on out that she actually graduated 3 years ahead of Kavanaugh. But this story is already falling apart. And Avenatti won't even say if Swetnick is specifically alleging that Kavanaugh raped her. So it's just ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous. Okay. Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch, was on C-SPAN saying that the New York Times story about Rod Rosenstein wanting to basically wiretap or record secretly Donald Trump to build a case for the 25th Amendment, it represents a significant breach of trust between Rosenstein and President Trump. But it's already getting murky as to what's going to happen. Supposedly, Rosenstein meets with Trump tomorrow to talk about his future. But according to this article out of the Chicago Tribune, they're saying that while Rosenstein is eventually going to be leaving his job, it may not be until after the midterms. So something is going on in the deep background, because according to this story from the Wall Street Journal, Trump is considering keeping Rosenstein on, at least according to his advisors. And that's a palm to forehead moment right there. I mean, it's possible the New York Times story was a hoax, but basically Rosenstein's violation of the special counsel statute all by itself warrants his firing. Okay, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with more news after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And this idea of attacking people based on alleged behaviors from years and years ago is starting to get out of hand. So Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is a potential 2020 Democratic presidential contender, has gone on the warpath against Navy Vice Admiral Craig Fowler during his confirmation hearing to become commander of the U.S. Southern Command over a decision he made 14 years ago to attend a party during a port visit to Hong Kong. Now, Fowler's attendance at the party was reported in a Washington Post article the day before the confirmation hearing. And the article describes this lavish party for more than 50 Navy officers from the USS Abraham Lincoln Aircraft Carrier Strike Group. And it was thrown at a luxury hotel. They had cocktails, cigars, caviar, black truffles, and lobster thermidor. Now, the party was thrown by Leonard Glenn Francis, otherwise known as Fat Leonard, who is now caught up in this bribery scandal. And apparently it was a Christmas party, and along with the guests, there were attractive women dressed up as Santa's little helpers. But apparently nothing untoward actually happened at the party. But Warren still thinks, how dare you be at a party with scantily clad women? This is really getting kind of ridiculous, I think. I think it is getting ridiculous here. All right, let's turn over to the war zones, because there is a lot going on. Russia has sent a stern warning early today to the western states against striking Syria, and basically reiterating that to the best of Russia's knowledge, Syria did dispose of all their chemical weapons. This was apparently in response to President Donald Trump's statement up at the United Nations that the U.S. will attack Syria if the Syrian government forces use chemical weapons. And just because we lied the last two times about it being Syria is no reason not to believe us now. So Russia is really pouring the weapons on into Syria. They're boosting their electronic warfare capabilities. The Israeli Defense Forces have announced they will continue striking targets in Syria as they have done up to date, basically despite the Russian decision to supply S-300 systems to the Syrian military. This statement came out following a special security cabinet meeting. In other words, we're not backing down. We're not backing down. Apparently, Israel also came out with a warning that if an Israeli plane is shot down, they will destroy the entire Hamaimim air base. So the rhetoric is definitely cranking up. So a lot of hardware is getting on in there. And Russia has just announced they're going to provide S-300 systems to Syria to defend the entire airspace. It's not just the military bases. It's not just the critical infrastructure. They're literally going to effectively set up a no-fly zone. So the question is going to be, what will Israel do? Will they try and test that zone? Will the United States try and test that zone? And what's going to happen if their planes get shot down? Now, Russia's sending a clear message. Stay the heck out. You have no business being here. And they're absolutely right. The United States has no legal, legitimate reason to be in Syria. There's no United Nations Security Council resolution authorizing them to be there. There's no declaration of war by the United States Congress. Syria hasn't asked them to be there. Syria hasn't granted their permission to be there. Just a succession of presidents have said, I'll just send the military on in there. I'm an imperial president now. We wage war where I say it's supposed to go. And that, of course, is a very dangerous authority to have in just one man, which is why the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution the way they did, to say that only Congress has the authority to declare war. So Israel is very upset, of course, over the S-300s. So is John Bolton. He's out there, oh, it's an escalation, it's an escalation, it's an escalation. Meanwhile, over at Military Times, they're revealing that once again, we are seeing mission creep in Syria. We've been in Syria, or the U.S. government's been in Syria for 7 years. And the public reason kept changing. We were there to get the evil Assad and his chemical weapons. Well, he gave up his chemical weapons. Okay, we're there to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Well, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are gone now. Well, we're staying in Syria. Why are we doing that? Well, we haven't come up with a reason yet. Apparently, they now have. Apparently, the United States government has decided that they are going to stay in Syria and have a right to stay in Syria in order to contain Iran. Yes, Iran is the new bad guy, and we've got to be in Syria to defend Syria from Iran. I'll let you in on a little secret. Syria and Iran are on very good terms right now. Iran is actually helping Syria deal with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So it's a ridiculous reason, but it's just the United States government stamping its foot in a tantrum and saying, we're not leaving, we're not leaving, we're not leaving. Okay, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Over in Yemen, the civilian deaths are skyrocketing since June, and it is now estimated that 1/3 of the airstrikes by the Saudis are hitting non-military targets, hospitals, schools, food storage facilities. They're just openly killing civilians here. And apparently it's also happening up in Afghanistan, where the United Nations has issued a statement voicing concerns about the rapidly increasing number of civilian deaths from U.S. airstrikes, reiterating that all parties have an obligation to protect civilians from harm. Now, the response from the United States and the Afghan government, the puppet regime installed by the U.S. in Afghanistan, say they're aware of the statement, which is a very polite way of saying, we don't care. We're going to go on killing the civilians until the country is pacified here. Over in Libya, there's been a month now of violent infighting in Libya's capital. And as you know, that official government of Libya was the one installed by the United States. They're now in trouble. And they're now actually asking for another intervention to come on in and save their bacon. Wait, they're Muslims. Save their lettuce. Because they're losing. And we know what's going to happen. The United Nations, or at least the United States, yeah, we're going to be back in Libya yet again. It was only 7 years ago that they were in there getting rid of Gaddafi. John Bolton is out there rattling his sabers with regard to Iran, saying, don't you harm any American interests. There will be heck to pay if you harm us. You better take me seriously. There will be heck to pay. So I'm wondering, is there going to be a false flag in Syria, a phony chemical weapons attack? Is there going to be some other kind of really horrendous false flag to be blamed on Iran to get that going? One thing that really concerns me, and I think should concern our military, is how rapidly the war agenda is being pushed forward. And I can understand from the politician's point of view why that would be the case. It's running out of steam. The American people are tired of war. We've been at war all over the world for longer than World War I and World War II put together. We're tired of paying for it. We're tired of seeing our kids coming home in wheelchairs and cheap metal boxes from all these war zones. So they're trying to get this thing going as fast as they can. And they're trying to provoke Iran. Story coming out of Fars News, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani is saying the United States is being a bully that is trying to create insecurity in Iran. And this was following that attack on the military parade that killed 26 people, including members of the country's Islamic Revolution Guard Corps. It's a replay all over again. We've seen this so many times before, where the U.S. government will go on into a country, overthrow the legitimate elected democratic government, and impose a dictator who will then plunder the country for the benefit of his backers. Iran in 1953, Chile in 1973, those are two known successes. Iran in 2009, that one failed. But the United States, since the end of World War II, has attempted to overthrow the government of 50 different countries. Some of them are friends, supposedly, like France, in order to put in a government more favorable to Western interests. Now, everybody is basically looking at what's going on at the United Nations. And even though Xi Jinping is not there, there is a very heavy Chinese presence at the event, which China and critics of the Trump administration's foreign policy see as an opportunity for China to assume the mantle of globalist champion and displace the United States as the world's most influential nation. And that's not a radically outrageous idea, especially when you recall how the General Assembly literally laughed at the President of the United States of America. We are an empire in decline. It is obvious to everybody at this point. Now, China has once again thumbed its nose at the United States, and it has to do with a port call in Hong Kong. The same thing that Elizabeth Warren is getting on this admiral's case about from 14 years ago. And that port call is basically where an American warship or carrier group will put into a port just for a visit. They sail on in, they drop their anchor, they go on out, do some shopping, allow tourists on board the craft. And this one has to do with the USS Wasp, which is the heart of an expeditionary strike group. It's an assault ship. And they were going to make port in October in Hong Kong, and the Chinese government is now refusing. They're saying, no, you're not going to be allowed to come on in here with your warship. And it's another sign of the deteriorating relations with China, which are being fanned, first of all, by the tariff war, the tension over the islands in the South China Sea, and by the United States' arms sales to Taiwan. So after a while, China's going to get a little upset about all of this here. This was a very interesting story. It came out of Zero Hedge here, and it's titled, "Naked Emperors Don't Get Much Respect." And it's talking about an issue I've raised here on the show before. What happens when most of your military infrastructure is suddenly obsolete? And they're basically tying it back to this fairy tale about the emperor's new clothes, in which the emperor was the last to realize that he was naked, which is not unusual. Rulers are very often the last to find out anything that's really going on because all their subordinates want to protect their job. But empires are built on military strength. And after 17 years of war, our military is exhausted. Our weapons are worn out. Our stockpiles are drawn down. The new weapons coming out of the military-industrial complex really are overpriced junk that doesn't work very well. And we're going up against Russia, which has new weaponry to which the United States doesn't have any defenses. Now, Russia just released a video of the test of their new anti-ship missiles blowing up some targets in the ocean. They're very nasty. It's the KH-35U anti-ship missiles, which are, the military claim, is a ship killer immune from all current enemy defense mechanisms. And this is Russia's way of saying, let's not have a confrontation. Now, Russia is about ready to deploy their latest generation, fifth generation fighter, the Sukhoi 57. It will be equipped with a hypersonic air-to-air missile with a 300-kilometer range. That is very, very intense. All right, let's look down at what's going on in Israel. Israel, so far this year, has killed 2 journalists and wounded 254 in Gaza and arrested 82 in the occupied West Bank since the start of the year. Now, according to Quds Press, this report said it had documented 638 Israeli violations against Palestinian journalists since the start of the year. Now, journalists are like medical personnel. They're supposed to be off limits. And they're clearly identified. They wear, they'll have a bulletproof vest just in case of a ricochet, but it'll say press on the front and the back, and you're not supposed to shoot at them. Another story coming on out from Electronic Intifada, despite all the investigations, allegations, and claims, it has turned out that there is absolutely no evidence that any of the Gaza protesters killed by Israel was armed. They were carrying signs. They were carrying banners. They were just gunned down. Now, Israel's trying to claim, oh my goodness, they've got helium balloons. They've got horrible things that, any nuclear-armed nation is going to be terrified of. But Israel's media, Israel's government continues to just rubber stamp what are clearly war crimes. Up in Great Britain, there has been a little bit of an upset because the Labour Party, defying the Israel lobby, voted to end all British arms sales to Israel, specifically over Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. And I think it's a good thing to do. And it may well be that what really caused the change of heart was that documentary on the Israel lobby in Great Britain, because that upset a lot of people. And right now, a lot of the British politicians, I'm sure, are trying to cultivate documentary released here. Israel applied a tremendous amount of force to prevent that documentary from being seen by you, the American people, because they're scared how you might react if you find out just how much Israel is controlling our government. As you know, Israel's getting a lot more money from the United States Congress. But the latest bill, which was sponsored by AIPAC, of course, has a little wrinkle in it that hardly anybody noticed. in past funding bills for Israel, there was always a provision that allowed the president to cut the aid as a means to convince Israel to go back to the peace table, for example. This latest bill, that provision is no longer there. It's just the money flows to Israel without any control whatsoever. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Donald Trump is holding a news conference right now regarding the latest fairy tale about Kavanaugh during his high school days. And again, you need to keep in mind, none of these accusers went to the police. It's just all coming up now, years later, perfectly timed to help the Democrats. It really could not be more obvious. And Kavanaugh's attorney does raise a very good point. If this Swetnick witnessed gang raping of girls at a party, and she herself was not a victim and had nothing to fear about embarrassment, why didn't she go to the police? Why didn't she even call the wheat tip line or something and say this was going on? Swetnick says this happened over and over and over again. Next, they're going to say that Kavanaugh has a Death Star. Okay. Now then, other people are starting to look at this new, improved definition of anti-Semitism that was put out by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And more people are saying this is really ridiculous to equate criticism of a government with hatred of that nation's people. And it really is silly. That's like saying that the only reason people complain about the Nazis is they hate the Germans. But Israel is pushing as hard as they can to get this mandated into law or the rules or something. They want to be able to basically criminalize criticism of Israel or support for Palestine. You're only supporting the Palestine because you hate the Jewish people. No, we're supporting the Palestinian people because they need help. They're being collectively starved. They have a just cause, the right of return. Apparently, over at Al-Aqsa Mosque during the Sukkot holiday, hundreds of Israeli settlers stormed the mosque, escorted, as usually, by heavily armed Israeli soldiers. And the Israeli authorities prevented restoration work from being completed in the compound. So the settlers stormed the compound in large successive groups through the Moroccan gate, one of the compound's entrances under full Israeli control. And director of the mosque, Sheikh Omar al-Kaswani, said that the Israeli forces took photographs of Muslim worshippers as well as the staff members of the endowment department while they were working on restoration projects in the compound. All right, let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, when I was born, I got touched on the butt by some doctor. I'm going to sue now. I'm going to sue.
Yeah.
What a... everybody's got to, like, they say, you say follow the money. Follow what's the common denominator. And it's all, this happened 35 years ago. It's a setup. It's a fraud. It's a false flag, Mike. This is a false flag. These are multiple false flags. It's a scam.
There are multiple lies. I wouldn't call them a false flag attack, but again, look at all the common features. These accusers have gaps in the memory. They admit that they were drinking. In the case of Ramirez, she isn't even sure that it was Kavanaugh. Now we're finding out this Swetnick isn't actually saying that Kavanaugh raped her. She was raped, but by somebody else, is what she's claiming. And again, none of these accusers went to the police at the time. They never talked about it until just now, and all of a sudden it came on back. Oh my goodness! I've been working through my memories, and I'm convinced it was him. And there's no question. They're being coached. they're being coached and they're being encouraged. And I imagine that probably, there are other benefits they expect to receive for being the point of the Democrats' attack on Brett Kavanaugh.
I'm just curious if all three have the same psychiatrist.
Well, given how widely apart they live, because the first accuser is out there in California. I really don't know that that's a factor, but it's very obvious. And as each one of these stories fall apart, they come up with another one, and each one gets more and more grandiose. And I noticed with the case of the Swetnick accusation, they've dropped all the talk about how Kavanaugh and his friends kept a torture dungeon in Washington, D.C. We're talking about high school years. High schoolers don't have that kind of resource. But
yeah, I think they pushed it on that one.
Yeah, they jumped the shark on this whole story, about drugging the girls and gang raping them. And I'm not saying things like that don't happen. But again, the FBI investigated Kavanaugh 6 separate times, and not a whisper of any of this kind of behavior came on up. And then all of a sudden, the accusers are just falling out of the trees. Dustin, stay on the line. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey. And Dustin, take it away.
And Mike, also, did you notice the last woman who accused? That she has security clearances, but the other woman, supposedly her father works for the CIA. Well, was in the CIA, and his father was in the CIA, and she was an undergraduate. There's a lot of shit. This is deep state tactics.
Please watch your language.
What happened?
I'm saying you got to watch your language. I'm sorry, you're going to get our on-air affiliates in trouble.
Oh no, I said deep state tactics.
Ah, okay. My bad.
Sorry. Yeah, but they all, I mean, can that be? Can these people just be out of the deep state? You know what I mean? Because it's obviously all set up.
Well, yeah, the deep state has been trying to get rid of Trump, and yeah, it turns out that all of these accusers have compromising connections. Apparently, one of the accusers' brothers is connected to Fusion GPS, and it's all the same circle of people.
Yeah, and Mike, I bet you they have a lot more to go. They'll keep pulling rabbits out of the hat, man. He shouldn't step down. They're hoping he steps down, but he shouldn't step down.
He won't. And Mitch McConnell's going to bring this to an end the end of this week, or maybe over the weekend here. But at this point, I just got an email from somebody saying the next accusation is going to be that Kavanaugh patted some little boy on the butt once, and therefore he's a pedophile. I mean, that's how completely out of it they are right now.
Yeah, if anybody believes this, they got to be really going to their own psychiatrist, because it's so obvious. It's all. I mean, the whole 36 years later, that's what gets a lot of people. Yeah, they're like, no way. And Mike, this is a threat to men who are might want to go on a date. Because I'm single, and it's kind of scary if you go the whole Me Too movement. It's like, you're afraid now. You know what I mean?
Well, it's not even going on a date. It's just in the workplace or something like that. Again, think of the Salem witch trials. When you hand anybody a blank check to hurl an accusation without proof at somebody in order to destroy their lives, they're going to use that. And like I said, we saw this all play out once before back in the 1990s during the male bash militant feminist movement. And they're trying to bring it back. The entire selling point about Kavanaugh coming from the Democrats is there doesn't need to be any proof. There's no presumption of innocence. After all, it's not a court of law. We should always believe the accuser. How dare you say that women would ever lie about anything? Who obviously these people have never studied the history of Lucretia Borgia.
The feminist movement's worse now, though. They all got breast knuckles. They're a little more violent now, don't you think? They're all part of Antifa and Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, it is getting more and more violent, and that's what yesterday's third-hour guest was talking about. that we're getting really close to where it's going to be violent. Look what they did to Ted Cruz. And they're still harassing him. They're sending messages, you're not safe, we're going to get you. That's not a polite, civil, political discourse. That's harassments and threats, and it should be actionable.
Brown shirt tactics, right out of Nazi Germany, Mike. I mean, this is right out of there. And then they call, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Ted Cruz because when he was running against Trump, he was also screaming for Syria, this or that, remember? Like so he's not a fan of mine. But, you know, if you go out for dinner, you know, you don't need no brown shirt tactics in your face. You know, like, I mean, and then they turn around and they blame you. You know, that's the whole thing. They blame the opposite because, you know, they don't want to take it on the chin, so they're going to blame somebody else for, oh, I shouldn't, you know, it's Trump's fault. You know, it's like, and Mike, real quick, if I have time, I'm going to switch over to Syria real quick.
Okay.
If Israel attacks if they attack that base, it's going to be game over for them. I mean, the Russians will just carpet bomb everything over there. Not you know, just the government-controlled command center. You know, because then you think the Russians are going to getting aerial assaults on Hyman Air Base? That ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen, you know? And the Russians are not going to take it on the chin with that. That's an act of war right there.
Well,
you know, I mean, 15...
Russia's going to have to play this very carefully because Israel could be provoked to the point of using one of their nuclear weapons. I mean, that's what Netanyahu was implying with that speech that he did down at the Dimona nuclear reactor. He was dropping hints. They're still not officially acknowledging they have nuclear weapons, but everybody knows that they do. And that's what he was dropping a hint, that they are willing to use a nuclear weapon. And at that point, would Russia respond in kind?
I would.
Well,
God's chosen one wants to use a nuclear weapon, Mike. They're chosen, so what do they got to worry about if they get the repercussions from it? If they're scared, they're back down, right?
I don't like cavalier talk about using nuclear weapons. And I understand that you're joking, and it's just all in fun. But I think once that line is crossed, you know, where nuclear weapons are acceptable, we're going to start seeing them used more. We ended World War II with nuclear weapons. My concern is we may start World War III with nuclear weapons.
But the war's already started, and you know that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. We just... Yeah.
And Mike, real quick, I don't know if you watched that video of that Russian Bastion coastal defense system video.
Yes.
If you get a chance, check that out. And have a good show, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are now open. And getting on back to the news here, Sheldon Adelson is throwing his money around going into the midterms, and he's apparently spending at least $55 million for the upcoming midterm elections to keep Republicans in control of Congress. And his spending commitment was first reported by the New York Times in an article describing how Adelson has become the most influential donor in the Republican Party. And of course, that's why the Republicans just go along with whatever Israel wants. And Sheldon Adelson is a perfect example of why this country used to have laws limiting donations to political candidates in order that the candidates would represent the will of the people and not the will of the rich. But we've lost that as well. Donald Trump is out there praising North Korea's Kim Jong-un, but he's saying the sanctions will stay for now. And he's once again voicing the attitude, Korea gives us everything we want first, then maybe we'll do something nice for North Korea unless we decide to invade. Meanwhile, we're seeing more and more signs from North and South Korea. They are moving forward. They've effectively, for all intents and purposes, ended the Korean War. The hostilities have stopped. They're pulling their weapons and troops back from the DMZ. North Korea has basically mothballed its artillery. And Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in, they're clearly on a path to reunify the Korean Peninsula, which, of course, the United States does not want to see happen at all. So let's look at the economic news here. Everyone is talking about a crash. A lot of people are very concerned because the Federal Reserve hiked rates again today, which did have a negative effect on the stock market, as is usually the case here. But according to this article, Investment Watch blog, this next crash is not expected to take down gold like other assets. And it's another reminder that if you want a wealth preserver, gold and silver and other precious metals are the way to go. And people shouldn't think of it as an investment, but simply as a way to preserve your wealth. And there is going to come a point where the manipulation to keep these hard asset prices down is going to start breaking down. Joe Saluzzi is out there saying that the markets are still way too vulnerable to a sudden liquidity disappearance. And Jim Rickards is out there saying the coming stock market crash will be like a runaway train with no brakes. All right, let's take a phone call from Bob in North Carolina. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Maui Mike. Here's the deal. You say that Elizabeth Warren chastised an admiral who's going to be promoted, and it was part of the Fat Leonard scandal. I don't care who, gives them a hard time over it. The fact is, it was a scandal. There were prostitutes there. There was a whole lot of wrongdoing going on. There were
not at this one particular party. See, the admiral in question was not caught up in the Fat Leonard scandal. And the parties with the prostitutes and everything happened more recently. And they did nail something like 60 naval officers are caught up in the scandal, but this guy wasn't one of them.
Well, you're wrong, Mike. Again, you're wrong, Mike. And what you need to understand is Vice Admiral Craig Fowler was indeed there, part of the U.S. Southern Command, and there were prostitutes there. You became triggered as an ideologue when you heard the term that it was Elizabeth Warren. It matters not who it comes from. The facts are the facts, and this man should not be being promoted.
Well, in the article that I quoted for this, the article itself says there was no untoward behavior at this particular party. And frankly, if he was caught up in the Fat Leonard scandal, I can't imagine he would be this far along in the confirmation process anyway. And by the way, speaking of getting your facts wrong, I live on Oahu, not Maui. So thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Now, as you know, our economy is dealing with a tremendous amount of debt, government debt especially. They're just spending money they do not have, and especially with an eye to the Federal Reserve pumping the rates up again. We're reaching a point, figure 2023, 2024, the interest payments on the national debt will be higher than the entire budget for the Department of Defense. This is coming out of the New York Times. And the ballooning debt, of course, is caused by an inability by those who claim authority over the economy to stop spending, along with the hike in the interest rates. And this represents a theft from future generations. Now just think about it. If we were still with the economic system this nation was started with, there wouldn't be a debt. Or it would be very, very minor. But when you are enslaved to a private central bank, you're trapped by debt. That's what it's designed to do. And our nation has now reached the point, our government has now reached the point where paying the interest on the national debt is going to outstrip the military budget. There's not going to be anything left over for the government to provide services to you, the taxpayer. That's the reality. If you walk around your local community, you can see what's going on. the infrastructure is failing. Pavement is cracked, metal is corroded. You go through the shopping malls, there's a lot of empty retail spaces, homeless and hungry all over the streets. Our nation is being plundered by the war machine and by the bankers. For all intents and purposes, we are living in a wartime economy. They don't want you to think of it that way, but that's what's going on. All right, let's take another phone call from John in Humboldt. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. You were talking about, matter of fact, I'm working right across the street from C. Crane here in Fortuna that makes the shortwave radios.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, I just thought I'd tell you. They're still up and running. I think it just expanded a little bit. But the other expansion that I really wanted to talk about was there's a company up here called Wing Inflatables. It's where Elon Musk came up and got those the bubbles for the kids down in
yes.
I think it was Colombia, right? I can't remember exactly, but well, about 3 years ago, they got a huge contract for the U.S. military, and their Wing Inflatables is like a competition for Zodiac.
Yes,
and they ramped up their workers from I think it was 17 people. A lot of my friends work there actually, so it was 17 people to 150 within a year.
Good.
And they've been pumping these boats out like crazy, and so it's good, but it just kind of shows that they're ramping up for a amphibious war. And so who are they going to invade is the question.
Well, I guess anywhere they're projecting power across a littoral combat zone. I mean, Syria has a coastline.
Yep.
And so does Yemen, so does the Gulf. There's a lot of concern about
Iran.
Possible interdiction of the oil flow through the Gulf. They're
Iran does too, right there. At the,
Iran does as well.
Hormuz. Yep. And so I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out in the airwaves because it was kind of curious when I first seen it going on. I also called you one time about Internews and how George Soros is funded it up here, and there's only two headquarters for it, and that's in Arcata and Washington D.C. Otherwise, it's spread out all across the world, and it's all in that area. And so I think there's something kind of mischievous about the setup of that place. And so,
well, anytime you've got George Soros involved, there's something underhanded going on. I hate to be that way, but again, this is a guy who during World War II plundered and looted his fellow Jews.
His own people.
Yeah, he collaborated with the Nazis in World War II.
Yeah, and the other one with that in thought too is that it's actually 51% funded by the federal government.
Now that is very interesting. Anyway, John, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economic news. Apparently, Boeing last year saved $227 million from state tax incentives while it cut 6,000 jobs. So whatever those tax incentives were supposed to do, they crashed and burned. What can I tell you? Now, when Trump was over at the UN, one of the things that he got onto was China, bashing China, saying that China is victimizing and cheating and plundering the United States. Well, in point of fact, China is not doing any such thing. They're manufacturing and they're being good business people. And trying to portray China as somehow, taking advantage of the United States. It's inappropriate. It's inaccurate. And more than that, it's that kind of rhetoric is not helping relations with China. Maybe the reason why the USS Wasp group was denied that port call in Hong Kong. I can imagine the leadership in China is getting very upset at the behavior of the U.S. government. Over in the European Union, the EU and Iran have agreed on a new payment system that will get around U.S. sanctions. This is, not surprisingly, a major snub to the United States. And the EU is going to create new payment channels to preserve oil and other business deals with Iran, saying that Europe, those European nations which signed the P5+1 deal, it's still in place. Iran is still in compliance. They don't see any reason to go along with the U.S. plan to sanction Iran into collapse. And interestingly enough, the EU at the same time is setting up similar systems with Russia and China. They want to bypass SWIFT. And that is a major, major body check to the dollar's reserve status. It's only a matter of time. You can see it happening bit by bit, day after day. The dollar's preeminence is in decline. And it's going down slowly, slowly, but at some point, it's just really going to drop. Everybody's going to bail at the same time. Over in Belgium, their prime minister, Charles Michel, came on out and said, Washington can't dictate who Europeans should and shouldn't trade with. And he's saying, we cannot accept that the U.S. decided the regions with which European companies can or cannot do business. So the world is definitely getting fed up with U.S. bullying, and I frankly cannot blame them. And I have a feeling that when the crash comes here, whether it's our economy or our government in a Soviet Union-style collapse, the world's reaction is not going to be sympathetic. It's probably going to be more along the lines of, thank goodness. All right, we got to take a break for commercials and station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking about the economic news. We're talking about how the EU is setting up alternative payment systems, not just for Iran, but Russia and China as well. And needless to say, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is out there slamming the EU plan. How dare you do business on your own terms? How dare you do business without going through our banks and our SWIFT? And how dare you dare to dare to dare, and went back, of course, on all the old propaganda. Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terror. That one's getting kind of old, especially now that it's pretty much known that ISIS and Al-Qaeda were being trained, funded, and supported by the United States government. So Europe just wants to let the trade flow. They want to go back to peace through commerce. They're sick and tired of all this constant war and constant conflict, constant regime change. Everybody in the world is tired of all these wars. We've really had it at this point. Turkey has announced they will continue buying gas from Iran despite the U.S. sanctions. And this is where that aborted coup d'etat comes back to bite the U.S. government on the gluteus maximus. And Erdogan said, we need to be realistic. I can't let people freeze in winter. You know, how do I heat the people's homes if they stop purchasing Iran's natural gas? It's a valid point. It's a very valid point. As I mentioned earlier in the show, between the sanctions on Iran and oil-producing nations refusing to increase output, oil prices are going up. And $100 oil is now a distinct possibility. There's even speculation it could go up to $150 per barrel. So when you're over at the gas station and you're pumping that Go Juice into your Go Buggy and you see that final price on the front of the gas pump, you know who to blame. The Warhawks. Now, apparently, over in Norway, there was this power trader who got caught on the losing end of what's called a 4 sigma move in price spreads. They're now going into bankruptcy after liquidating his entire estate. In other words, he's got nothing left. But in the United States, 2 former J.P. Morgan traders who racked up comparable massive losses have managed to walk away, because the losses here in the United States don't go on the people who made the loss, they go on the American taxpayers. Because that's what makes fascism great. That's basically what fascism is. If you make money, you get to keep it. If you lose money, the losses are transferred to the general population here. Now, this is a little smelly. It kind of reminds me of when Michael Chertoff was in charge of the Department of Homeland Security. He set up all these requirements for scanners and gloves and swabs and everything. Then he retired from government service and set up a company that sells scanners and swabs and rubber gloves and all the rest of it. New York State's former top pension investment officer, Vicki Fuller, made a $100 million investment into this controversial gas company, the Williams Companies. Then she retired from the pension board and was immediately appointed as a director of this company for $300,000 a year. And it's not even a full-time job. Boy, oh boy. All right. Such a deal. Right now, here's the reality. We were talking the other day about people starting to live on their credit cards, which is a big mistake. People having to dip into the equity in their homes to get by. Right now, 1/3 of American households can't pay their bills. And the Federal Reserve just hiked the rate, which means all those variable rate mortgages and variable rate credit cards, those bills are about to go up. And for those 1/3 of American households who can't get by right now, the situation is going to get worse. You can't look at that on such a scale and claim that this is a healthy economy. It's just not going to work. This economy is in serious, serious trouble. The nation has been bankrupted on war and Israel, and not to mention intense amounts of corruption and the predations of the Federal Reserve. Down in Mexico, their new president-elect is saying their economy is hovering on the edge of bankruptcy, which apparently took a lot of people by surprise because Mexico's prior leadership had been somewhat deceptive to the Mexican people about how well things were going. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Over at Wells Fargo, they're getting ready to lay off 26,500 employees. And they're outsourcing American jobs and importing foreign workers. Because it's all about that bottom line and profitability and keeping the stockholders happy. And what astounds me is there is nobody anywhere in Wall Street or the government or anywhere in the field of economics who's willing to stand up and say, look, if the American people don't have jobs, if they're not able to trade their labor for realistic wages and salaries, then they're not going to be going into the stores to buy the products the manufacturers are manufacturing. And it's all going to shut down. They're certainly not going to have money to put into the Wells Fargo bank. The short-sightedness of this policy is stunning. And I know this offshoring and outsourcing began about 15 years ago, but look at how the standard of living in the United States has declined during that time. That's when this all began. Okay, let's talk about immigration, refugees, so forth and so on. Apparently, hundreds of teens identified as Somali refugees rampaged through the Valley Fair amusement park in Shakopee, Minnesota. It was the first night of the Valley Scare activities. As you know, we're coming up on Halloween here. And police said the number of individuals running through the park increased substantially, was difficult to control. They were attacking people and terrorizing the kids. And ultimately, they had to shut the entire park down early. Now, police describe these Somalis as fighting, terrorizing children, pushing children, knocking over the Halloween props. And one victim said, the media doesn't want this out because there are 3 Muslims running for office. Over in Great Britain, there is now a 3rd monkeypox case. Apparently, a medical professional who treated the 2nd patient before the diagnosis was made that it was monkeypox has come down with the illness. And that is a nasty, nasty disease. Didn't see that in Great Britain before. All those refugees came walking on in here. Getting on back to Mexico, Mexican state and federal authorities literally took control of Acapulco's entire police force after suspicions arose that criminal groups had infiltrated the department. So, okay. Now, here's a happy ending to a story. This has to do with a lady, Tammy Hedges. And during Hurricane Florence, she and her group, and they operate an animal rescue operation, they went on out and they rescued a whole bunch of animals from Hurricane Florence. And because she had administered some veterinary medicine, she actually got arrested for saving these cats and dogs and other animals. And it prompted a public outrage, predictably, and the charges have now been dropped. Now, regarding the medications, something a lot of people don't know. If you go to a pet supply store, you will find racks and racks of medication, some of which are available to humans only under prescription. But you can buy it right off the rack there in the pet store. It's a much smaller dosage, obviously, but you're allowed to medicate your own pet. And so, I mean, with everything that happened after Hurricane Florence, didn't they have something better to do than harass this lady? That would be my question. Okay. Now, there is a movie out. It's called The Gossamer Movie. It is about abortion. It is very much anti-abortion. And they're taking it around and they're screening it. And they were scheduled to screen their movie in the Hyatt Hotel in Austin, Texas. The problem was the screening was due to take place at the same time as a Planned Parenthood $400 a plate gala dinner headlined by Cecil Richards, the organization's former CEO. And apparently Planned Parenthood put pressure on the Hyatt Hotel, who canceled the screening of the Gossamer movie, citing security reasons. All right. There has been another incident of a tetanus vaccination being found to sterilize people. And this happened over in Kenya. And Kenyan President Raila Odinga basically had tests run on the tetanus vaccine from AgriQuest Limited, which is based in Nairobi, and basically showed that these vaccines were laced with chemicals that have sterilized something like 500,000 women and children. Now, this was something that really got going after National Security Study 200. But it looks like there is a massive depopulation program going on. And I guess Nairobi wanted to do it to Kenya. And how will Kenya respond? I get a lot of email from people who are saying, you have to admit, there are too many humans on Earth. And I'm inclined to agree, especially during rush hour. And there's always going to be a population problem because sex is a lot more fun than dying. And having evolved a technological society, we no longer have predators who will thin us out. We don't have to worry about saber-toothed tigers, or woolly mammoths or anything else killing us in the jungle. The diseases that used to keep our population down have basically come under control. So, yeah, it is an issue. The problem I have, though, is that those who favor population control want to be in charge of it all, and they want the population that is being controlled not to have any say in the matter, like these women in Kenya who probably didn't know what was in that tetanus vaccine and certainly never gave their permission. I know there's a lot of people who'd be perfectly okay with saying, yeah, I don't want to bring a child into this world. You know, I'll have a vasectomy or a tubal ligation. You know, I'm perfectly okay with that. But let it be up to them. And you can have an ad campaign showing how bad things are and saying, do you really want to bring a child into this world? And just, you know, approach the problem that way. But don't be sneaky about it. My stock answer for anybody saying that the human population has to be reduced is, go ahead. There's a tall building right over there. Just jump off and try to hit a banker on the way down. Let's see. Over in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, they are starting to express serious concern about this Ebola outbreak. And it first appeared in August. It's already one of the worst in history, the 7th worst to be precise. And according to World Health Organization Deputy Director General for Emergency Preparedness and Response, Peter Salama, it could spiral out of control because it's a conflict zone. People are moving around a lot. And they are hard to track. They can't tell who's infected, where they're going. Now, there's another little article over here. And I think this is right on board. This is from Natural News. And it's saying that transgender surgery is rooted in the idea that doctors can cure mental illness by permanently maiming patients. Now, I'm hesitating on that term mental illness because of the growing possibility that a lot of people, especially young people, who think they're transgender have just been talked into it by this liberal idea that there's no such thing as a biological male or a biological female. In any event, I would advise people to not undergo any kind of surgery for purely cosmetic or political reasons. Remember that Johns Hopkins study that came on out that said medical errors are the 3rd leading cause of death after cancer and heart disease. Now, you're not going to deliberately do something that increases your risk to cancer. You're not going to deliberately do something that increases your risk of heart disease. Why deliberately do something that increases your risk of having a medical mistake done on you, especially for something that's for appearances only? And basically, I find this a sign of the decadence of our current society, that this sort of thing is going on here. Continuing on the theme of political correctness, over in, let's see, well, I don't have where this was, but basically this came out of the BBC. And over in Great Britain, there was a billboard poster bearing the Google definition of the word woman. And Kelly J. Keane Minshall told the BBC in an interview she paid £700 to have the billboard say women, comma, women, comma, or woman, women, comma, noun, adult, human, female. That was put up. But then this LGBT activist complained, saying that this represented a hate campaign, a hate group. And the billboard got taken down. It really is getting silly here. Pay Apparently over in Point St. Lucie, Florida, there was a teacher, Diane Tirado. She was hired by the Westgate K-8 school, and she's apparently been fired for refusing to give a 50% grade to students who didn't turn in any of their homework. That's kind of like workers that don't show up for work demanding half of their paychecks anyway. And it's another reminder of what a joke our education system has become. Now, apparently, when this teacher was hired, she was never told that the school has a no-zero policy because we don't want to harm their self-esteem. And she lost her job over it. I hope she sues. You know, school should be about achievement, where those who are excelling at their studies or their athletics should be recognized for that. And yes, the kids who aren't studying as hard and they're not doing as well, they may feel bad that they're not getting the good grades, but wouldn't that motivate a choice for them to do better? If you have a school system that says you can sit here and do nothing and you'll still get a passing grade, what are the kids going to do? What are they going to do? All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and the Kaonohi is continuing. They're going to fight this right down to the wire. And it's still not known if Christine Ford is going to show up tomorrow. And there's going to be some last-ditch effort by the Democrats to wreck this or derail it or get it called off. They're not going to give up. I mean, when you have Mazie Hirono out there screaming about how Kavanaugh doesn't deserve due process, just the accusation is enough to condemn him. Like I said, Salem witch trials all over again. McCarthyism all over again. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You were talking about world population, and one of my favorite references for the numbers on this, if you were run a search engine search on the term world population events time unit, it will take you to a chart from the U.S. Census Bureau that shows births and deaths according to time units, year, month, day, etc. Well, that chart shows that approximately on a daily basis, in every minute of every day, 104 people die.
Yes.
And there are 1,440 minutes in a day. That's approximately 150,000 human beings dying every day. But that number is vastly offset by the 350,000 babies who are born every day, making for a net natural increase of 200,000 hungry new mouths to feed every time the sun rises and sets. And these numbers are kind of hard to comprehend. But when you talk about the world being crowded or traffic and stuff like that, the vast majority of Earth's landmass is not populated by human beings. Human beings, being made mostly of water, tend to congregate along the shores of oceans and seas and along freshwater inland waterways. So we live, near the ocean or near rivers and lakes and things like that. And so if we were to want to spread out a little more, actually, we really could. Some people I've written on this sort of thing talk about, Earth and biomass and the number of people, how the Earth could easily sustain 12 billion people. And the numbers are expected at some point to naturally plateau off eventually at some point in the future. I'm thinking mostly what I read is around 12 to 15 billion. But if we were to employ our technologies and our resources and our brains and our efforts to, irrigate arable land with things like drip agriculture, if we were to concentrate on developing infrastructure for fresh water, desalination, things like that, water resources, sewer resources, and building infrastructure in more sensible ways rather than dedicating so much of our production to war and junk. All the consumer. Even what I am a capitalist. I do like fair trade and people making things and industrially making things, but we are polluting the earth pretty badly, and all that stuff we throw out in our garbage cans and our recycle bins does make for a lot of mess, and we have to, we do produce a lot of trash. So
yes, we do.
Basically, the earth can support us, could support us easily if we were not so injurious to the earth in the way we go about doing things.
Well, you're absolutely right there. War is certainly destructive of the environment. The reason we're putting out so much trash, of course, has to do with corporate profitability, where the business model is planned obsolescence to get us to work hard and keep buying the same thing over and over and over again, whether it's cell phones or watches or TV sets, and we just throw the old one into the landfill and go out and buy a new one, which means more of the natural resources are being used up. And it's very frustrating that all the people who are screaming about the environmental problems and human-caused global warming, they never mention that aspect of it, that it is the American way of manufacturing and selling products that is really a major contributor to the sheer volume of trash that's being dumped into the landfills.
Right. I mean, you buy some little doohickey for $14, and it's got a cardboard box and a plastic bubble and styrofoam and twist ties, and it all goes just right in the trash. And
yep.
And then $15 doohickey breaks within 6 months.
Yep.
And we just keep filling the dumps up with that stuff. We've got an island of trash in the Pacific Ocean, the size of Texas or whatever, from all sorts of trash from all over the world.
Yes.
And if we could only, if we could only live more in harmony with nature, as they say, and those mortality numbers, they're daunting. I was struck by the fact that the 3,000 people, if one accepts the number of 3,000 people who died on 9/11, well, the 3,000 people represented, as traumatic as that was and as horrific as that was, those 3,000 people represent only 2% of the people who died that day alone.
Yes,
in the world.
It is. Anyway, listen, Glenn, interesting numbers, interesting information. Got to let you go and take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And with a reference back to our previous caller, I want to clarify the term trash island, because it's been all over the media. We have this trash island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's the size of Texas. And unfortunately, it's sort of being presented in a way that implies that you could sail your boat up to the edge of this collection of trash and just step off and walk across it like any other island. That is a terrible miscalculation. In point of fact, there's a lot of trash out there, but it's spread out quite a bit. And it may have been there for a very long time. It actually took somebody going on out and saying, what's the density of the trash distribution here, before they realized that there was this cluster of trash caught in one of the ocean current vortexes. So there's that. There are a lot of problems with the way the world is being run. Sooner or later, the oil is going to run out. Nobody's really working on something to replace it with, because the oil corporations discourage alternative systems. And I'm finally, I'm glad we're finally getting into the electric car revolution. But again, the vast majority of those are being charged with electricity from oil-fired power stations. So the oil companies are still getting their money, even if you're driving an electric car. We could be seeing a lot more development of solar cells, more efficient solar cells. But again, all the money is going toward war. And it's very destructive. And so, I agree with this other gentleman. It would be nice if we could live closer in harmony with nature and not have an economy that makes its profit by selling us the same thing over and over and over again, depleting the raw materials that are out there, and loading up the landfills with a lot of highly toxic junk. See, I have a dream world where when you buy something, it lasts forever, and you don't need to worry about buying it ever again. You go on and you buy something else that you need. And I realize that would bankrupt a lot of companies. I need to find that Pyramids of Waste documentary and get that back up on the website again. A little early in the show, we were talking about this Johns Hopkins study that revealed medical malpractice is the third leading cause of death. Now, when you go on out and you do a web search for leading causes of death, medical malpractice, medical mistakes is never on the list. They don't want you to know, but it has been confirmed. And the reality is that medical malpractice kills 500 times more Americans than accidental gun deaths. So stop talking about gun control and let's start talking about doctor control. Anyway, there's been another big scientific scandal, and apparently this one involves Jose Baselga, Chief Medical Officer at New York's Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. He's the published author of hundreds of articles featuring the most cutting-edge cancer research. The New York Times called him one of the world's top breast cancer doctors and a towering figure in the cancer world. Then it came on out that Baselga had failed to disclose the fact that he'd received literally millions of dollars from big pharma and medical corporations whose products were being promoted in all of these articles. So, the corrupting influence of money. A lot of people are still concerned about colony collapse disorder. And for those of you who may be new to the term, it's talking about the honeybees. Because the honeybees are a major part of food production all over the world, because they are the pollinators. The honeybees go out to the flowers on the crops and they will collect the nectar, and during the process they will move pollen from plant to plant to plant, which allows the plant to create new seeds. And it's basically the way farming has been done for hundreds of years. But all of a sudden, starting about 6 years ago, honeybees started dying off. And fingers were being pointed all over the place. A lot of people tried to blame cell phone towers, except that cell phone towers had been around long before colony collapse disorder. There was an article in Nature magazine that indicated GMO pollen was harmful to benign insect species. Then the counter accusation was that it was a mite that was infecting the bees. Then it was the nicotinoid pesticides, and they may all be culpable. But the latest research is basically showing that glyphosate, which is supposed to be innocuous to animals, actually disrupts the gut microbiota, and they've known that's true for us humans. This stuff is not innocuous to us. It harms our digestive tract, and it harms the digestive tract of honeybees. And again, glyphosate is this horrible, horrible chemical. It's a probable carcinogen. And exposing bees to glyphosate alters the bee gut community and increases susceptibility to infection by opportunistic pathogens. So that is at least one of the major reasons for colony collapse disorder. And if the honeybees go away, if they go extinct, there's going to be a major problem for food production. I mean, can you imagine hiring people to pollinate the plants by hand? That would drive up food prices like you would not believe. There's already research at robotics companies to make a robot honeybee that will fly from plant to plant distributing the pollen. So that's another one of the major problems planet Earth is facing here. Over in West Virginia, they are basically going to go ahead and allow voting for the midterm elections on smartphones. And the reason being given is to make voting easier for members of the military deployed overseas who cannot get to a more traditional means of voting, like a desktop computer, or rather a polling place here. And they determined that most electronic ballot delivery technology required access to the desktop computer, printer, and scanner, all of which represent barriers to overseas voters, especially those in combat zones or engaged in covert operations. The problem is security experts are saying they don't know that the system is secure. It hasn't been around long enough to test it, to see if it might be hacked, that if it could be taken over. And in an age of just unbridled election fraud, that has to be a concern. Now, I absolutely agree our military should be allowed to vote, but I think they could simply vote early with a paper ballot. One of the biggest disasters to hit our political system was putting the election system on electronics, which are invisible to the end users. You don't know what's going on inside that voting machine. And if you're at all curious, you can visit Bev Harris' website, blackboxvoting.org, or hunt down the HBO documentary, Hacking Democracy. And even if you just watch the end, where they show how these electronic voting machines can be rigged to steal elections, it's worth seeing, because our elections are not secure, they are not accurate, they are not verifiable. Our election system is an absolute joke. And if you're looking at potential solutions, over at my website, whatreallyhappened.com, right underneath at the upper left, there's my picture. And yes, it's an old picture, I should replace it. There's an article, How to Have Honest Elections, which lays out a very simple way to have elections that are going to be very, very, very difficult to rig and very, very easy to detect when rigging is taking place, as opposed to our current system, which almost seems designed to facilitate election theft and to then cover it up after the fact. Now, as our corporate social media has basically decided they're going to be the arbiters of what goes on the internet for all Americans, there has been a lot of talk about, should the government intervene? Is there an antitrust action or anti-monopoly action? The Trump White House issued a statement they were going to look into it. But there's a somewhat more pessimistic view over at the Daily Bell, saying that the government is not going to hold the big social media corporations accountable because the government has been working with the big social media corporations all along. And the idea is that right now the deep state is definitely trying to use social media to swing the midterm elections. And it's estimated that Google all by itself is going to be able to swing 12 million votes simply by not allowing any conservative opinion or anything critical of a Democrat to be seen by the general public. Now, that's an awful lot of power for an unelected organization to have. And a lot of people are, in fact, very, very upset. Okay. Now, over in Great Britain, another big stink over there. Apparently, MI5, MI6, and GCHQ broke the law by spying on the human rights group Privacy International. And the data was collected as part of two mass surveillance programs called Bulk Communications Data and Bulk Personal Data Sets. And the Investigatory Powers Tribunal said they shouldn't have done that. And they're saying they don't know why MI5 went in there in the first place, but the fact that it happened at all raises serious questions. And yes, it does. There needs to be a privacy pushback. You know, Europe is surging ahead on that. Some of the countries now have a right to be forgotten law, where you can go to some of these search engines and data collectors and simply say, I invoke my rights under the right to be forgotten. And they are required by law to delete all data they have on you from their systems. We don't have that in this country. If you close down and delete, for example, your Facebook page, your account won't be there anymore, but all the data they've collected on you, all the time that you used it, that's still there. and it's available for sale, mostly to marketing companies. Over at, speaking of Facebook, apparently there is a little bit of a kerfuffle between Mark Zuckerberg and the founders of Instagram. And apparently there's been growing tensions over the direction of the photo sharing app, and it's led to Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger, who founded Instagram. They've been with the company since Instagram was acquired by Facebook in 2012. They're considering leaving. And apparently part of the problem was they were frustrated with Zuckerberg getting more and more involved on a day-to-day basis. So just coming on in to what was supposed to be their little turf. This is a little bit out there here. Spotify is claiming to be able to create a heritage playlist of your music based on the results of the Ancestry DNA kit. And apparently people are already signing up for this. They're going to get their DNA genealogy, and then they're going to get music playlists that play to that, which means everyone's going to end up playing Africa by Toto. There's something you need to understand. Those test kits are not very accurate. And in a way, it's almost the biological equivalent of astrology, because these kits that claim to be able to say you're descended from certain famous individuals, no. Basically, more than a few generations back, and the DNA just becomes diffused. It's mixed in with too much other, and there's trace amounts that are of academic interest. And there's even one case where apparently one of these DNA tests that was owned by a liberal corporation was intentionally adding other people into your ethnic background to sell the idea that we're all multiracial, there's no such thing as a pure person, and so let's move forward with the one world government. And that was just basically dishonest. And there, of course, are concerns that these companies are saving the DNA, making it available to the government, making it available to corporations. And there's an interesting little aspect of the law a lot of people don't understand. If a corporation gets your DNA, and in your DNA they find something useful, of value, you don't get anything out of it. You're not allowed to copyright your DNA. There have been a couple of test cases along this line where somebody's DNA provided the aha for a new cure for a major disease, something that was going to be worth billions of dollars. And the person whose DNA it was said, I'd like a little bit of that. And the court said, absolutely not. Your DNA belongs to the corporation now. All right. Out here in Hawaii, they've reopened Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. They're offering 2 new tours, and they're basically selling the idea that if you have been to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park before, get ready for a shock. It's a dramatically different landscape. It's dramatically different Kilauea caldera. It now has a new 1,000 plus foot deep crater, which used to hold the lava lake. Unfortunately, throwing a little cold water on that, over the last couple of days, there has been a new flurry of earthquakes up at the summit. Now, nobody is saying it's going to erupt again. Basically, at this point, the idea is it's run out of lava. And if you go to see Volcanoes National Park, you will not see any lava, at least for a while. It's going to be years and years before lava starts showing up again. Claire and I were very lucky. When we went down there, there was lava flowing. I got video of it, and it was a lot of fun. But it's still worth seeing. It's still worth seeing. And in the absence of flowing lava, it's actually going to be safer, because you don't have that risk of just plunging through a thin crust into a flowing lava tube. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we're going to be back with the last segment of our program today. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today. And turning on over to the church pedophilia scandal, the Pope is trying to deal with it, but he's kind of thrashing around because he's got nothing to work with. It happened. And that the latest revelation out of Germany, it's a monstrous situation here. But the Pope is doing his best. He's out there saying that Catholics shouldn't be judgmental. It's all the fault of the devil, so forth and so on. Now he's come on out with a doozy. He's saying the Catholic Church should not be judged by modern standards over sexual abuse scandal. And then he refused to answer questions about these 3,700 children assaulted by German priests. Now, technically, the Pope is correct. At other times throughout history, attitudes about adult-child sex have been very, very different. In ancient Greece, it was considered quite acceptable. But the priests committing those acts today in Germany do not live in ancient Greece, and that's where his argument falls apart. And just because the Greeks did it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. If the Greeks jumped off a bridge, would you feel obligated to do the same thing here? The Pope is actually starting to talk about ending the celibacy requirement for the priesthood. And I think it would be a good thing for a wide variety of reasons. The reason the celibacy ban existed in the first place goes all the way back to the Middle Ages, when the priests and bishops were basically grabbing the women, having sex with them, producing offspring, and then had to use church assets to take care of all these little kids, to pay for them. And it was a major economic problem. And that was when the Catholic Church said, no more of this, you've got to be celibate, hands off the women, no more marriage, and that will be that. And it temporarily, so it did reduce the economic problem of having to care for a population of children who were brought into the world by the clergy. But this is today. And there are such things as birth control. And I think probably that a lot of this issue would go away if the church got rid of that celibacy requirement. So, but again, it's a mess. And I think something that is emerging from the internet and the independent media is the realization that the world presented to us by corporate media and by the government is really mostly cover-up about people's corruptions, whether it's scientists selling out their science to pharmaceutical corporations, the clergy molesting children. There's a lot of evil out there, and now we see it, and now we confront it. And on that note, I hear the music. It's time for Claire and I to get on out of here. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. And please take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know. Send it in email, send it in paper mail, start printing out leaflets and brochures and pamphlets. Don't bother with social media. It's being totally filtered. We need to go back to SneakerNet and get the word out, especially going into the midterms. The Democrats are trying to grab the Congress, and if they do, all the investigations that we have all been demanding go away. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.